One word which is often used these days is narrative, and the related expression narrative building. Let us try to understand through this video the importance of narrative and narrative building. In India, I think the first instance of narrative building was in 1857. Prior to that, whenever a king attacked another king, or even a tribal leader brought his forces from elsewhere and attacked any of the kingdoms, it was seen as a conflict between kings and rulers with the purpose of acquiring more and more land. The resistance or the sense of enmity did not percolate to the common public, and it was expected that the king of the kingdom that had been attacked would resist and push back the aggressor. In 1857, a change took place. One is that the agency or the entity that was trying to occupy lands and spread its influence was not a clearly defined king, but a business group, which of course was supported by the British government indirectly. Another thing was that with time, it began to be apparent that the company was not only trying to acquire lands and expand its business, but the members of the company were also trying to spread a religion and to change the culture of India. This took the issue to the masses, and the result was that 1857 became a mass rising rather than just a war between kings. One indicator of this mass rising is that, unlike other wars, the first shot in this war was independently and prematurely by Mangal Pandey, because the feeling had percolated far and wide. Therefore, it was a soldier who gave the first shot. And then, although the War of Independence, or mutiny as the British call it, could not succeed, but this produced a very important result. That is, the British began to be seen as an outsider who needed to be pushed back and pushed out. The feeling of outsider is not seen to that extent in case of Mughals or other Muslim invaders. I think this was a paradigm shift in the public reaction to the rulers. Now, this feeling of British being the outsiders who had to be pushed out began to percolate to the lowest levels of society, especially through the newspapers and journals in regional languages. And this became so effective and so pervasive that in 1878, Lord Lytton had to bring an act called Vernacular Press Act in order to ban such propaganda, as we may call it. But the resistance to this act was so sharp and so pervasive that in 1881, Lord Ripon had to repeal this act. So, the narrative building, the spread of ideas far and wide, and the participation of masses in developing a certain political attitude. This is what had built up by the 1880s. And that is when A.O. Hume created a political group called the Indian National Congress in 1885. Now, this group built a three-pronged narrative. One aspect of the narrative, one part of the narrative was targeted at the British bureaucracy, and the purpose was to convince them that the diamond called India should not be lost by harsh handling. It should be retained by accommodative dialogue. The second prong or the second aspect of the narrative was addressed to the educated Indians, and the purpose of this narrative was to convince the Indians that the British are a very gentle, democratically oriented, kind-hearted nation. And if you convince them that you should be given freedom, they would be ready to do that. And the reason why they are keeping you under their control is basically to prepare your nation for democracy and for modern political values. So, this was the second, and then the third narrative extended Macaulay's philosophy that an ideal of a British should be projected. That is, for the Indians, an ideal should be created that the highest value that a human can achieve is to become like a British. So, if you can become like a British in your style of dressing, speaking, use of language, style of thinking, religious beliefs, etc., then you would have achieved the highest that you can achieve as a human being. So these three narratives began to work, and they produced a number of results. The best specimens, the best two specimens perhaps, of this Indian Britain model were Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And these two became very powerful instruments for communication by the British, who used them to partition the country. Apart from these two perfect models of the Indian Britain, there were others who adopted and integrated some of the Western values into their lifestyle and style of thinking, and a beautiful combination of the traditional and the Western emerged, which still continues. Now, these two Indian Britons headed their respective countries after partition. Jinnah died very soon after independence, and what he would have done with his nation is difficult to surmise. Pandit Nehru, on the other hand, introduced some very good measures. his focus on science and technology, his focus on creating democratic institutions, institutions for the dispensation of justice, and a number of other steps are very laudable. But at the same time, there was also some sort of resistance on his part towards the spread of original Indian culture. And this resulted in a dichotomy in the attitude post independence, which is visible even today. Now, in this context, what is very important is narrative building in today's world. India is emerging as a world power. It has all the potential of becoming an independent power which need not be guided or controlled by anyone else. It can play a role as the Vishwaguru, as a country which does not try to dominate others and works for those fundamental values that we call Sanatan. But if India is to achieve this role, then India must have persons who can communicate very well in English, which is the medium of international communication. Therefore, if we want to become the Vishwaguru, we must produce the best communicators in English. We should be able to say exactly what needs to be done, and the world should prefer to listen to us than to anyone else. Therefore, we need to develop speakers who are very good in English for international communication and very good in Hindi or other regional languages for communication and narrative building within the country. So we need to create a network of such people. Thank you very much.